Well, hey guys, welcome to the Reach Right podcast, episode number 7. My name is Thomas Costello, and my co-host is with me, as always. It is
Ian Hyatt. Hey.
Hey, Ian. Welcome, man. Exciting times for you, huh? You got a lot of stuff going on in your life. Thank you for making the time for this.
A lot of stuff. Yeah, moving. That's
always.
moving right when school starts. That's not recommended. Usually people try to move before school starts, but it just didn't happen that way. We tried for sure.
Yeah,
but,
and digital school, online school, no less, right?
Yes, yeah. So we're teachers, movers, everything right now, and podcasters and consultants, and we're just going in all directions. But
all of it.
By the grace of God, we'll get through it.
Yeah, well, we got a good topic today, though, so
Yeah.
I think it should be fun to discuss this. The topic for episode 7 here is the 7 financial changes your church should make for 2020. I think this is going to be something that'll be helpful to pastors that are listening or watching here today. I think that a lot of people are still investing or spending money the same way that they always have. They're using that budget they set out for their church at the beginning or in December of last year. They said, hey, 2020. We were just joking the other day about how 2020 was, everybody had that same vision statement for the year of clarity and
the year of
perfect
perfect vision. The year of perfect vision. Yeah, that's
right. And
we've been seeing a lot. I don't know how perfect it's been.
But, I did not foresee this. That's for sure. The world that we live in here now. But
I bet some of those pastors are scratching their heads. Was that really supposed to be the word?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there is a place for that, but I'm excited just to kind of dive into this conversation here because I think that so many churches set up their budget back in January or December, and if you're living on that budget in this new COVID world that we live in, you probably have some changes that you need to make. You can't wait till 2021 to make them either. You probably have to make some moves, a bit of a pivot right now, I would say. So we're going to tackle some of those things that we think are the 7 biggest ones that will help churches survive in this pandemic world that we're living in.
Yeah.
We should note, probably just because I think things change so much, we're recording this on August the 20th of 2020. So for most churches, they kind of shut down mid-March, and I'd say, would you say about half of them are open still right now? Is that kind of what you're hearing, Ian?
Yeah, still about half. Yeah, still right at that point. A lot are planning right now to reopen in the coming month or two maybe.
Yeah, and there's obviously some investment that goes with that we're not going to talk about is investing with safety measures and legal stuff. That's outside of our purview of being able to comment on those kinds of things, I think. But here in Hawaii, where I am, we just got into like a new borderline shutdown phase. They limited a few very small churches were open because they were gatherings over 50 were banned. So smaller churches were open here, but they just changed it down to 5. So no groups larger than 5. So my family of 5, we can't even have one person in our presence, or else we have to shut everything down. So everything is kind of, so this is going to vary from state to state, obviously, those things. So we're trying to keep it mostly general as we get into these topics here. But I'll go ahead and kick off. Number 1, the first thing that we think that churches should take a look at here in 2020 in financial changes they should make is looking at digital staffing. And I don't mean by that having outsourcing staffing. I think you still have people on staff there, but bringing your staff digital and maybe even like converting staff that did more physical activity to doing digital activity. There's so many positions in churches that revolve around activities on Sunday mornings that for a lot of churches, if it's happening, it's not happening, not as many people are coming to it, and there's a lot of different activity, I think, that maybe isn't as important as it maybe used to be back pre-COVID, I would guess. So the idea of what your worship leader does or your children's pastor does, their Super Bowl was every Sunday, right? Their big day of the week was Sunday, and now that's kind of changing. So I think that it's probably wise that we take a hard look at our staffing and where we're spending our money. And that's not to say that these people are we get rid of the people. We still believe in people, but they probably have to convert their job a little bit in order to make an impact in this season. What do you think?
No, I think that's exactly it. So I think, yeah, and I like how you mentioned that. It might mean hiring a new staff person or something like that. We all want to keep everyone. Of course, when this whole thing hit, of course that, compassion would say, let's try to keep all of our leadership here. So no, I think that's, but yes, it's very important for people to be able to pivot and learn new skills for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. I think churches have to be bold in that sometimes. So, as someone who's pastored churches and I led Reach Right for our whole existence here, and we've led in other organizations, you and I, Ian, so we know about this. People are what matter. We really believe in people, but sometimes with an organization, you have to make some of those kinds of hard decisions on people. And I hate to think of it, but there's the church that I pastored before we moved back home to Hawaii to get into ministry and do things here. They've had to go through a lot of staffing changes, and it's hard for us to watch. So I imagine most of our audience is really wrestling with some of these kinds of things. So my encouragement to people is that we probably have to be bold in these times, knowing that we're probably not going back to the same pre-COVID world that we saw when we were setting up our budgets back in December. If your thought is, hey, let's just hold down and stay strong until we get out of this, or maybe until we get a vaccine and then everything's going to go back to normal. Well, I think staffing changes might be a little bit more permanent than they're going to be reverting back to normal here. So I think that, as hard as it is, I think there may be times where you have to be almost ruthless with the way that you're leading your organization there and make some of those really hard decisions. But I think number 2 kind of goes along with this. There's an idea. Why don't you tackle that for us?
Yeah, and that's staff development. And this is gonna, when we can, we could be bold and compassionate at the same time and develop the staff that we have.
Exactly.
And help them evolve, if that's the right word, into what is needed as far as their role during this time. I use the example I was telling you, Thomas. I was talking to our worship leader at our church, and like you said, Super Bowl was always him planning and preparing for everything worship on Sunday, and that was the Super Bowl time, right? But then all of a sudden he was stressed out when this first thing happened. He was like, I've been learning how to become a content writer, and I'd never wanted to do that. I never thought I would ever have to do something like that. But absolutely, he was learning it, and it's kind of funny. I think it also reminds me of when this first happened, the shutdown and the pandemic happened. I think the first thought that came to mind was, we're going to be a little less busy. We're not going to have as much to do because everything's shut down. But it's been the exact opposite. And every pastor that I've talked to is they've become something like a content writer, or or communications. That's so much more critical now. Someone's had to develop their pastoral role and become more of a communications pastor. It's been interesting.
Yeah, I've said before that the communications director for your church is the second most important job that you have on your staff there for most churches nowadays. And I really believe that is there's so many opportunities, and it's just a different world that we're in with all of that. I think that's my heart, is that I think for a lot of churches, our goal should be to really look first at the staff that we have. You have so much invested and developed with people, and those relationships are important. Churches and staffing changes are harder than other organizations because there is such a tight bond with staff people, and it always costs people when staffing changes happen. So wherever possible, I think it's best if we don't have to change staff and have new people come in. But there's just a lot of challenges that come with trying to convert people that maybe aren't that technical, because technical skills are at a premium right now. I saw this. My son, I have 3 kids right now that are all learning digital school and trying to do school online, high school, middle school, elementary school. So all 3 ages. And my 3rd grader is on right now with his teacher. And get this, my 3rd grader has a teacher that I had when I was in 3rd grade. So he has that same teacher here now, same guy. So he is up there. I think he's in his 70s.
Wow.
And he's a little technically challenged, it seems like. So he doesn't have a lot of connection. So right now, my son is actually, I just walked out there. He is on a video call, and my son's camera is right, but his teacher, his camera's pointing up at the lights right now in his classroom there. So, so sometimes you have some of these things that just, you have staff that might not be technically gifted. I think investing in them, working on training things, and we live in a time now where there is so much education available to people, whether it's paid courses, whether it's YouTube videos, and just being able to learn just about anything you could want to learn. And I think giving your staff time and resources to grow in these areas, like you mentioned, content creation, content writing, video production. The great news is you can learn a lot of this stuff online, whether it's paid or YouTube. And I think there's just a great opportunity for people to do that now.
Yeah, and it's funny when you mentioned the example of your son's teacher there. We started today virtual back to school, and our daughter has the opposite example. So whereas her math teacher has done a great job when they were on their Zoom call, he's passing out air high fives, and he's saying lingo and doing all of these things. So she thinks he's just the coolest. But he had to learn that a little bit too. But he took the time.
Yeah, what a great example, like of someone who learned it and developed their skill set, I think, and it makes a huge difference in the experience your daughter is having. Yeah. How much more can we do that in the church and improve?
Because it's already challenging enough for them, right? So and not just for school. Think about it for church too. It's a challenge. Yeah, we've talked about how it's tough. People are starting to have, an issue with virtual church. When I say issue, but just it's difficult to sit through all the time compared to a live message for many folks. Now, for some folks, they really prefer the virtual thing. And I think, Thomas, it's good to address. I think as some people are listening to this, they might be thinking, well, why should we invest into all of these things? When things go back to normal, we won't need to be content writers anymore. Well, that's still going to be important. Your web presence, your online content, still going to be important, still going to have so we'll be even better prepared. So I think that's a good thing to mention as well. So.
Yeah, that's good. Let me hit number 3 and a little bit of a pivot. So we should be investing and spending more of our money on digital staff and staff development. I think also spending some money on video equipment is probably appropriate. You may not have planned that for your 2020 budget, but this is definitely not a short-term experience we're going to be having here. And I think video will only become more valuable to churches as we continue to go through this and continue to move even past the COVID era. I think it's going to be really important. And I think it makes sense for churches to invest something in that. And here's the thing is that it doesn't take a huge investment in order to get results and do decent video quality nowadays. That's the great news, is that I remember when we started out, Ian, you and I used to go to the, was it the WebFX? Or no, it was the WFX conference.
WFX,
no,
that's right.
The WFX conference.
You got it,
which was the big church facilities conference. And I remember we would walk around and there would be cameras for sale, and we would be helping churches with websites at these conferences and kind of presenting there. And then there'd be these cameras that were like $250,000 for cameras that churches would use for recording. And then there would be $100,000 boom stands that they would go up on and all these kinds of things. And churches don't need anywhere near that kind of equipment nowadays. That you can do decent video production for under $1,000 probably. Like handheld, mirrorless, or DSLR cameras can almost always get the job done. If the church has more money to spend, you certainly can invest more. I love that there's been a pivot to doing more handheld video. I think that's one of the big things, a bit of advice that I would give to churches. We have seen a huge difference when you move, especially for worship times, when you move off of a tripod or off of a boom arm and move into a handheld kind of an experience, because it gives kind of that, like having people do a handheld and do almost like a slow figure 8 motion like this. It gives people that experience like they're actually there in the audience and feeling like they're part of worship and not just back in the balcony watching down on worship. So it's the difference in your video production between being there and being an observer is what happens. So anyway, all that to say, I think that churches with a few little things, get a decent DSLR or a mirrorless camera, something modern. You can record in 1080. You could probably even record in 4K. You can do that kind of stuff. I think that's something that would probably help most churches there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue into the next thing. And the next, when you're focusing on video, the next natural thing to think of is having a good studio set, a good setting for your production. And so that's going to be things like lighting. That's more important now. And having a good backdrop, for behind your worship or behind the preaching. We had a couple episodes, didn't we? I think we addressed just how, and we just mentioned it a little bit ago here too, that to keep people engaged online is often a little bit more difficult when they're sitting on their couch and they're just watching a talking head, or it helps to have good visuals. It helps to have good lighting. Before, this wasn't as important because we'd mostly be focusing on the in-person worship experience. But now having good lighting and a good backdrop to keep people engaged and good visuals, we all say this, right, in church. And I as many churches as I talk to, Thomas, I always hear, we want to have a spirit of excellence. And I heard this. Yeah. I heard this before COVID. All the time, and even more so now. Is it important to have excellence with our production? And so those things. And again, it's not. You don't have to spend an arm and a leg for these things anymore compared to how you used to. And again, even if you're a small church, some pastor might be thinking now, well, we don't have a big stage, we don't have a big setup for this. It doesn't exactly take that.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, this is the great equalizer because you don't have to decorate an entire stage. I went to a mega church, a conference that was there, and I talked to the people that did all of their stage design and everything. And this place had, I think it was 128 80-inch like flat screen TVs just for color accent on their stage at this mega church here. Yeah. And it's amazing. I mean, I'm not here to criticize that. I thought it was so cool to see. Yeah. But a studio, you can really reduce the size and the space of what you're working in, and you can do this for $1,000. Not a lot of money would have to be spent to make something that's really a cool looking studio. But you hit it on the head. I think lighting is probably one of the main things that a lot of churches overlook, is making sure you get that lighting. You want probably some kind of background lighting, but having lighting that's coming onto your face, having that and getting close-up shots and making sure you have decent lighting like that, it is so important with video production. If I were pastoring a church right now, I would be sure that my video content and the video production side, I would probably not do it on my platform or my in the sanctuary on the main stage, because that's designed for a different kind of audience. Right. I would probably get something much smaller where you can control the lighting better, where you have a very specific backdrop, and it lets you really come across as more authentic and intimate. And I think a lot of churches, to put it this way, I think you probably want to think of yourself almost more of like as a YouTuber. Like you think of what YouTubers do, and I know YouTubers have their kind of this perception we have of what a YouTuber is, and there's a lot of things and advantages, but there's YouTubers, they've kind of dialed in a way that really works, and there's kind of that standard style of lots of cuts that you can have in YouTube and close in, and a lot of getting up on people's faces. So there's a lot of we can learn from YouTubers, and I think pastors, if we start to think of ourselves that way as YouTubers, because that's where a lot of our content is getting viewed, I think that would really help a lot of us.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, cool. Well, let me hit number 5. We'll tackle that. I think this is a bit of a pivot there. So from getting out of the video content, I think churches should probably reevaluate their budget and maybe invest more in the area of benevolence, in the area of being able to help people. And we have this broken into a couple of different ways. When I talk about benevolence, I mean actually meeting the needs of people that are in your church or people that are in need in your community there individually and directly. Yeah. This has been a life-changing time for a vast majority of people. I find this is really different from community to community. I talked to some churches in communities where most of their people have lost their job in this season, and most of their people aren't paying their rents or their mortgages. And then I talked to other churches in other communities where they hardly have anybody in their church that's really going through a deep financial crisis in this season. But I think every church has somebody, and maybe some more than others, but some people that really need assistance in this time right now.
Yeah.
And we probably ought to make a pivot in our budgets that would help us to make a bigger impact for people that are going through this kind of stuff right now. What do you think?
No, I think that's spot on. And obviously as the church, we're called to be that bright light and that resource for people, even during a difficult time. And I know some of the first thoughts that pastors had, or that I had, was well, how do we do outreach and get missional when we can't be near someone, or we got to be 6 feet apart or have a mask on? But there's a lot of neat stuff that we can do. And I think you also hit it on the head as far as, it's interesting, you see, some churches, their people have been affected and impacted financially, some not at all. Some have actually, even depending upon the industry that they're in, have even seen more success during this time. And so it's kind of bittersweet, obviously, there. But I think, when you think about people in the restaurant industry or hospitality industry, they were hit harder. Those types of people, and there's a lot of neat stuff you can do. So I know for my church, one of the main things we did with so on our property, we have our new church building that was built, thankfully, a year before all of this. And then, but in the old sanctuary, we've converted that to a food distribution, area. And then we even had, when this first happened, we had a lot of the older ladies in the church started making and coming there together and knitting masks and making masks for people with our church logo, or just with good Christian messaging or scripture on them.
Branding, so, I love it. Church logo masks, I like it.
I know. There you go. But other than that, I've heard of some neat things other churches have done, where talking about like restaurant owners that were hit hard, like inviting them out for a big gathering where they give them, free gas gift cards, or some sort of financial relief, like gift cards were kind of the main thing that I've heard. But when you target those specific people that have been hit hard, you can kind of get creative on what are some things we can do to bless these people that have really seen a lot of loss.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, and I think that kind of leads to number 6. I'll go ahead and tackle number 6, because I think it kind of is the line between the two. There is benevolence. I think of that as how we can help individuals, and then churches probably need to invest more into missional outreach. And sadly, I think that for a lot of churches that I've heard from, that the temptation here is to close down a little bit and be a little bit less outward focused and focus a little bit more on what people within the church are looking for, because there's plenty of needs there, right? There's so many needs within our own churches in most cases, but this is precisely the time where I think missional outreach and doing that kind of outreach is the most valuable thing for us to do right now. So you mentioned what your church is doing kind of benevolence wise, but also, that kind of,
with
when
outreach,
you're so the food pantry, that's not just for members, right?
No. As a matter of fact, we prefer it to not be for members. Of course, we've been assisting members that have been hit hard, but no, that's for, we have marketed, if that's the right term, to some of the harder hit communities, within our zip codes that can make it out, and made sure that we know this is for the community, not just our church community. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, we had a really cool thing we did at our church here. We started this thing called the Kokua Center. Kokua is the Hawaiian word for helping, or being able to lift up or help people. And so we started this Kokua Center, and we have this nice, we have a shopping center in our town here, lots of restaurants. We're in Hawaii, so in Hawaii there's lots of touristy type restaurants and those kinds of things, and most of them are locally owned. And when this pandemic hit, absolutely,
making me hungry.
When the pandemic hit, tourism stopped here, so we shut down everything. There were no outsiders at all, and then they said, if you want to come, you have to stay for 14 days in a hotel room at your own expense before you can go out to the beach. So tourism.
That's why we haven't come. That's why we haven't come to see you, Thomas. I don't want to do that.
That's right.
No thanks.
We want to do this podcast live. That's
right.
it, in person and face to face. But so these restaurants are are just absolutely slaughtered by this, right? So no tourism. People couldn't eat out for a while, and then they were just doing takeout, and so they just got hammered by this whole lockdown and pandemic, as most restaurants in the country have. So I think many of them are not going to reopen their doors. That's just the reality of the way things are now. But what our church did is we put a program together through outside donations. So none of the church's tithe dollars. We just invited people to join us in this, and people contributed, and we invited everybody in our church to go and eat at any restaurant in the entire shopping center, and the church paid for half of the bill. So the church would cover half of the expenses. You would just send your receipt or take a picture of you eating the food, and it was usually takeout because that's all that was open. So you'd take it home and take a picture of your family eating the food. And this was great. I mean, it was like tens of thousands of dollars that went back into these businesses and being able to help them and kind of keeping them going, keeping employees there. It made a big impact. It was so successful that more money came in for it, and we had more sponsorships that happened, and then we expanded it to other shopping centers here so that to all the shopping centers in our town, by the end of it, they were all eligible for this Kokua program that we started doing, and made a huge impact. But the point is I think that churches need to be thinking more about missional outreach right now, not less, and probably spending more on missional outreach now, not spending less in this kind of season here. So I think that's just really a big opportunity for churches. So
exactly.
Why don't you tackle number 7 for us? You can round us off here today. 7th, but probably the most important.
Yeah, is really your website, and I mean, this is just, it's been mind-boggling. I'm on the ground more with what we do at Reach Right, and have my ear to all pastors. And I think what's been interesting more than ever before, I think there was so your website was important, obviously, before the pandemic hit. So statistically, 85% of people would end up at your website before they took the next step, which was usually to visit in person. Now that number's still the same, if not more. Forbes said a little while back that websites in general, 90% of people would end up on them before making a purchasing decision. So we've known that they've been your number one marketing tool for a while. I think what was interesting though is there's been a certain segment of churches that they didn't understand the value of it, or they thought because social media was such a big thing with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter that they can just kind of abandon the website, that it lost its purpose. Well, we know that that's not true. There's now social media is great, but also having a great website in tandem with all of that stuff is going to be obviously very effective. But now even more so, I find it interesting that churches that have neglected that and not traditionally budgeted or invested in a good website, we're hearing more from those churches now more than ever, aren't we, Thomas? So, I mean, I can't believe it. I mean, the churches that I've heard from more than anything are smaller churches that either didn't have a website at all, that were either aging or a little more traditional. They just didn't, they were used to investing in their traditional means of outreach or whatever else. But now it is the main hub, and it is where, if it's done well, it will not only be the main hub for reaching new people, but it has become now in this season even more of a communication tool for your church compared to how it used to be. So if you invest well into that, you're just gonna see a lot better results and we can go on and on about what can be done there. But
yeah, I mean, so we're in this industry for a reason. We help churches do this because we obviously, you and I and our whole team here, we really believe in it. That's the heart of what we do, is helping churches reach more people with the gospel of Jesus Christ and do it the right way. And I think the right way right now is with a web presence and doing things digitally.
Yep.
I don't think I can overstate the importance of your web presence in 2020, and that is going to continue on. I don't think it can be overstated. Here's the way I would say it, is that I'm a big fan of Andy Stanley's model of the different phases of relationship with churches and their community. And there's like that idea of the foyer, the living room, and the kitchen, right? So one of the things is that the foyer is where you meet people and kind of start to connect. The living room is kind of maybe in small groups and the way that people start to make really deep connections. But if you're really close with someone, it's the kitchen is where you hang out. You'll sit around in the kitchen. You and I went to a small group once where the first meeting was in the kitchen, and that didn't really. We just sat in the kitchen the whole time. I remember.
Well, it was not all sitting. There was limited bar stools there at the kitchen, and so it was a lot of standing in the kitchen, which I remember.
The moral of the story is don't go to the kitchen until people are ready. You have to start in the foyer and then in the living room, then go to the kitchen. But the point of this is that the website, over the last 10 years or so, had become the foyer. So it had been the first impression, the place where people start to make connections. I think it has now pivoted certainly to the living room. It is the place where people make deep life-changing relationships. They start to happen in that living room area of the website. So those can happen online. It probably happens. The website is a place where people get on to Zoom calls or do online meetings with people and have that kind of life intimacy. But it's also becoming the kitchen, where it is the place where some of our deepest life connections happen, are going to be online, they're going to be digital, and your website is going to be the platform where a lot of that kind of stuff starts to take place right now. So I think that it is a pivot where really all aspects of church life, I'm not saying that they're forever going to not be happening in person, but I'm thinking that it's not going to change and is going to continue to be more and more digital and more happening on your website. And if your website is an afterthought, where you say, hey, let's put $20 a month and get something that's free and we'll just try to figure it out on our own. If you can do it, hey, more power to you. God bless you. That's, this is what we do. So there are people out there that can pull that off. But the vast majority of churches, and we know because we look at churches and talk to them. You talk to dozens every week, I know, Ian, that the vast majority can't pull that off. And it is worth investment to put money into this area. And even if you hadn't planned on it for 2020, your priorities should change because it is that important that people invest there. Right?
That's it. Yeah, I don't have much to add. We're not going to go over all of those things. That was in another episode as far as strategy, but we're always here to help with that and talk more through that. But I think that just knowing that that's where everyone's going to end up and you have more control over what you do there, it's a worthwhile investment.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's our thoughts, guys. I think this is something that we hope has been helpful to you. If this podcast has been a benefit to you, please do share it with other people. You can share it on YouTube as well, but the biggest thing you can do is like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. That means a lot to us. We hope it's been helpful to you. Been really cool to see how many people are jumping on and listening and watching, and it's been really cool to see all of that. So thanks for sticking with us. We hope we see you guys next week. Take it easy.
See you guys.